A table saw or a chop saw is normally used to produce the wedges, which are needed to produce the segmented rings, which in turn become part of a segmented project such as this segmented wood bowl. However, this technique wastes a good deal of wood due to the wide kerf of the saw blade. We developed a system to accurately cut these wedges for segmented rings on a bandsaw. We call this system the Accu Wedge. By cutting these wedges on the bandsaw, much less wood is wasted due to the narrow kerf of the bandsaw blade. In addition, cutting these wedges on a bandsaw is much safer than cutting them on a table saw. The Accu Wedge is operated in conjunction with the Accu-Slice bandsaw accessory. The Accu Wedge has several unique features. It's constructed of a 9.5 by 15 inch long by 5/16 inch thick hard coat anodized aluminum plate with 4 roller bearings mounted on its base. These roller bearings slide effortlessly on the Accu-Slice rail to provide for a smooth and accurate cut. The Accu Wedge uses 2 independent pivoting fences with an accurate angle set between the 2 fences. A similar technique has been used with wedges on a table saw in the past. However, with the Accu Wedge, there's no need for the wedges. The angle for the fences is set with an auto-indexing system that locks the fences in place. The number of segments per ring is labeled on the table to produce rings from 4 to 72 segments per ring. These index angles have been precision machined into the Accu Wedge table with an accuracy of better than 1/10 of a degree to enable the production of precise joints with no gaps between the joints in the segmented rings. There's a total of 17 possible segments per ring selections that have been auto-indexed in the table, including the odd numbers 5, 7, and 9. The 2 fences are made from solid aluminum with a channel on the top of the fences for the addition of a variety of clamping systems to securely hold your wood in place while you're cutting, and also to enable you to keep your fingers far removed from the bandsaw blade. The all-metal construction of the Accu Wedge system provides for a quality system that is sturdy, versatile, and highly accurate. The Accu Wedge system as shown here includes the Accu Wedge indexing table, 2 fences, 2 clamps, an aluminum diversion ramp with magnets, and a dust shield mounted to the bottom of the carriage. Some additional accessories are available for the Accu Wedge, including the Accu Stop, which enables the accurate reproducible setting of your segment lengths, a bandsaw laser system to indicate the exact cutting position of your bandsaw blade, and a variety of clamps of various sizes. The setup begins by firstly installing a 3/4 inch by 14 teeth per inch bandsaw blade, as described in the second video on the Accu Wedge. The bandsaw blade selection is critical for the optimum operation of the Accu Wedge, so please view this video. The Accu Wedge has 4 roller bearings mounted on its base, and these slide on the Accu-Slice rail. This is what gives you the clean, smooth cuts. Begin by first of all loosening the 2 coarse adjustment knobs on the Accu-Slice system, releasing the 2 mag jigs, and then adjusting the Accu Wedge system so that it is close but not quite touching the bandsaw blade. This is usually about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch clearance. Then tighten the 2 coarse adjustment knobs and then 2 mag jigs on the Accu-Slice system. This locks the table position in place. Next, check the bandsaw blade to make sure it's perfectly perpendicular to the Accu Wedge table. If the blade is not perfectly perpendicular to the Accu Wedge table, then you'll need to adjust the tilt on the bandsaw blade. Most bandsaws have 2 knobs under the table that can be loosened and the table angle adjusted. Check your bandsaw manual for instructions. After adjusting the table, be sure to retighten the adjusting knobs on the bandsaw table. Next, position your ramp, again that is close but not quite touching the bandsaw blade. The purpose of this ramp is to divert pieces of wood away from the bandsaw blade after they're cut so they don't get tangled up in the teeth of the bandsaw blade. If you're using clamps that can be installed into the slots on the fence at this time, we recommend using the clamps. They assure that the wood does not move when cutting, and it also keeps your fingers further away from the bandsaw blade, making it a much safer operation. You can also set up the optional Accu Stop if you purchased it, or you may prefer to make your own stop. This stop will be later adjusted to determine your segment lengths. I'm now ready to cut my first set of segment wedges to make my first segment ring. So the first thing I need to do is select the number of segments that I want to cut for my segment ring. In this case, I want to make 8 segments per ring. So I move my fence to the 8 position, and it'll click in place in the 8 position. Then I lock it down. Do the same thing to the other fence, 7, 8. The pin locks in place, and then I lock it down. This will give me exactly 8 segments per ring. No further adjustment is needed. Then I take my piece of wood, and you notice this piece of wood, I put a line off to one side of the board. This is so I know always what the top surface of my board is. So after I cut my pieces, I always know what the top surface is. Then I set my board in position, turn on my laser beam. This laser beam tells me exactly where I'm cutting on the board. It serves 2 purposes. One, it tells me where I'm cutting and making sure I keep my fingers out of that line, path line for that cut. I set my Accu stop so that I'm cutting a board just right through the apex of the wedge. So I'll get nice wedges with perfect point going to the center of the segmented ring. Also, I want to make sure my blade guide is as low as possible. Again, just for a safer operation. And you have the option of either using clamps or not using clamps. I prefer to use clamps for 2 reasons. Number 1, it makes sure the blade doesn't move while you're cutting. And number 2, it enables you to hold the board back here far away from that bandsaw blade. So it's a much safer way of operating the system. So next I put the wood in position, tight against the fence, against the stop, and then lock it down with my clamp. And then we're ready to start cutting. Now when I'm going to be cutting these wedges, I'm going to be cutting fairly slow. I prefer to cut slow in order to get nice smooth surfaces on my cuts. The slower you cut, the better the finishes on your cut. So there you can see all the components worked. Passing the board through the bandsaw blade, my diversion ramp pushed the board away from the bandsaw blade so it didn't get tangled up in the teeth of the blade. And let's look at some of the finished product here to see how we did. And you can see nice smooth cuts on all those pieces. A little bit of fuzzy on the edge which needs to be sanded off. A little bit of a burr here which need to be sanded off. And I'll show that next, how we clean these up and then fit them together to get our finished segmented ring. To clean these wedges up now, all I do is I have some 220 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand these flat surfaces to get rid of the fuzziness. And that's all it's needed to do to get those cleaned up. So now I finish with the rest of the wedges. there's our finished segmented ring with perfect joints, going to a perfect point in the center. The Accu Wedge is now available and in production. Check out our website for additional details on the Accu Wedge, the various accessories for the Accu Wedge, and also the Accu-Slice and the various carriages available for the Accu-Slice, including the Celtic ring jig and the flat plate carriage.